Hey travelers, you're in the LZ and welcome back. I want to have a conversation. This is something that's been popping up in the No Man's Sky discourse more and more prominently since the next update, and more so, surprisingly, than with the Visions update. And I've been kind of sitting back and kind of digesting it. At first, when it began to crop up, at first I was just like, oh, please, let's not do this. And as time began to, especially since Next, as time began to go on, it's been about, we're looking at about another 6-7 months since Next launched. I began to start to see what people were talking about, and really maybe even start to agree with it. So before we begin, please don't forget to leave a comment down below, and I want to hear your thoughts about today's subject matter about No Man's Sky. And the question, essentially, to me, it seems, at least how I'm reading it, is that No Man's Sky seems to have lost its charm. Now, before you react, if you have not been part of this conversation, or if you have not noticed that people have been saying this, because on Twitter and YouTube, the conversation actually was first started by Skint Boot from MZK. I'm not even from that area. Who says Zed? I don't know. I say it only because he says it. Yeah, rock on. Fair enough. And then I began to see it more and more on Reddit, with long posts. There was this sort of, I can't find the post anymore. I wish I could, because it was a pretty rousing, like President Whitmore from Independence Day's speech, about how somebody, I think it was No Man's Sky 1 from Reddit, had said that, he talked about how much he loved this game, but how he thinks that, and this is paraphrasing from what I can remember, but that No Man's Sky has kind of strayed away from the original vision that made it attractive so many years ago. Folks, need I remind you, and this was something I had to remind myself too, and I kind of smacked my gob at this, but No Man's Sky is almost 3 years old from launch. Throw in another 3 years, I think, 3 or 4 years before that No Man's Sky was initially revealed. Now, I am absolutely done talking about the launch and the pre-E3 content versus the post-E3 content. Hello Games, in my view, has absolutely killed it in the content offering that they've put out since then. They have more than overcome a lot of the challenges that they had from the launch, and a lot of the criticism and the accusations of lies, and which I still don't believe is true. Jean-Marie didn't lie to anybody, at least anything outside of lies by omission, which I'm perfectly willing to have a conversation with that, because that feels logical to me. I'm still planning a video on that here very shortly about making the case for No Man's Sky, where it's almost kind of like a short documentary about what happened. And of course, it's going to be absolutely pro No Man's Sky. My view has slightly shifted regarding the launch. But anyway, I digress. So here's some of the initial arguments that I think I'm understanding from this conversation. Firstly, when No Man's Sky launched, when No Man's Sky was revealed, captivated me. The very first trailer was enough to have me consistently paying attention to this game and thirsty for more information, thirsty for more footage. The flood happened. I freaked out because I thought it killed the game and things like that. No Man's Sky was originally shown as this vibrantly colorful game that pitched this sort of idea of individualism within a greater universe, that there's nobody else there. Multiplayer was kind of hinted at a little bit, and it was supposed to not be this sort of huge mode, this gigantic undertaking, but rather the possibility of meeting other people. But there was this concept of sci-fi and going to the center of the galaxy, which I think is, to me at least, part of the argument, and I think the validation of the argument that No Man's Sky lost its charm, at least what was originally pitched, and some of these things that have sort of gone by the wayside since launch. I think that when we look at the spectrum of colors that it showed, the availability of structures and wonder, and the allure of the Atlas and not knowing anything about it. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it neutral? Is it necessary? We can argue all day long about what the game was pitched at content-wise prior to launch, but when we get into sort of what No Man's Sky's identity was 3 years ago, No Man's Sky has come a very long way. And even graphically, Hello Games have gone completely out of their way to make this a game that is graphically and artistically superior to what the original pitched version was. And I think where I can start to see where the validity of that conversation comes in is that in doing so, it almost seems as if they have maybe even inadvertently pulled away from the aspect of artistically and aesthetically being a vibrantly colored game, and with brights and artistically these huge hues of red and blue and green. I have the original trailers playing here just to give kind of an idea. And even before Atlas Rises, and funny enough, and if you don't know about it, check the description below, but there's actually a community on Reddit that is sort of separate from the subreddit, the main subreddit of No Man's Sky, that is dedicated to foundations and sort of the earlier versions of No Man's Sky, because people are there enjoying that version of the game more than they are the current version, because of how maybe better colorfully and artistically the game was back then. And that was the moment when I discovered that community that I began to say, they maybe have a point. They absolutely have a point. When I look at some of these photos of the color, and I don't agree that the terrain generation was better back then. I think that's nonsense. Objectively, the terrain has been made better and more varying. No Man's Sky has a variation issue in itself, right? That is a thing that it's always kind of had a problem with, but it's slowly beginning to work its way out of it. I personally would love to see a gigantic update that does nothing but just add just thousands of assets to the game to accommodate for variation and planetary variety. Those things would be absolutely wonderful to me. But that's a separate issue to itself. So artistically and conceptually, it's hard for me to not agree that No Man's Sky has seen some level of deviation from its original vision, color-wise, presentation-wise. Now, I know what you're about to say, and I said literally the same thing. But we had Visions. Visions was an update. Visions added a wider spectrum on the color palette to present in the game. It actually went so far as to even ruin some pretty decent planets retroactively. It didn't wildly change these planets, but it sort of made planets that were once colorful not colorful anymore. Like, I had a pretty neat home planet. It had massive flora that sort of just waved in the wind as if they were underwater, with pretty reds and yellows, and now it's this gray hellscape. So I'm not even angry at that. I mean, it was necessary. I will never complain about a universe reset if it is advancing the game. But widening the color palette was not raising the color palette, right? Colors are still very muted. Colors are very, they're not very bright. They're not as pronounced. They're not, and the variety of colors, the amount of colors that you see in any given moment Granted, the game has added planets where color spectrums hardly ever existed, where everything is just sort of black and white for whatever scientific reason. But at the same time, the colors didn't widen in their depth. However, and here's the thing, I am not a developer. I'm not a coder. I'm not a programmer. Hello Games are the wizards, clearly. That's a credit that we can absolutely afford to them, as they have crafted a masterpiece. But in doing so, I think it's sort of soured the experience for some to a degree, when it was the color and the originality and the indie game feel that people were looking forward to in No Man's Sky. In general, I think that Hello Games has a wonderful game in No Man's Sky. Finally. I do have some deep wishes for No Man's Sky in general, for its next big update. Please check out my 2.0 video here and in the description for a top 10 list of some of those things. That video is doing pretty good, and thanks for all the feedback on that one. Folks, tell me what you think about No Man's Sky's current graphical design, color palette, and tell me what your feelings are. I think that No Man's Sky is a pretty game. I think that Hello Games have kind of backed away from the beauty and the vibrance of No Man's Sky in effort, maybe, and again, this is conjecture. Again, I'm not a developer, but in effort to afford that processing power and that ability towards other aspects of the game, right? Other performance aspects, artist aspects. I mean, you very rarely see any pop-in No Man's Sky anymore, which was one of the biggest complaints that it had yesteryear. So I think it definitely has come far. But here's the thing. A solution to all of this. Hello Games is listening. If at the very least, every single update that has launched with No Man's Sky has proven that, because it's always contained some variety of things that the community has asked for. Base building, vehicles, for the colors to be fixed from next to vision, underwater bases, things like that. There has been a gradual advancement of those types of things, and I can't wait to see what the next updates have to offer. So folks, if you thought this was informational, and if you thought this was beneficial to your No Man's Sky learning experience, please do come hang out for future LZ videos, like, subscribe, etc., and talk to me in the comments below. I'll see y'all later.